What's going on, everyone? It's Sean from All Things EV, and in this video, I've got a guest. You may recognize his voice, but may not recognize his face. Rob Maurer from Tesla Daily Podcast. Did I get the name of it correct?
You got it right. Yep.
Yes.
Got my name right too.
Yes. Well, welcome. Yeah. Thank you. No, I practiced that a little bit in my head before we hit record.
Yeah, it's got the silent R in there, so it's a little bit tricky.
Rob, welcome. So glad to have you on. So glad to actually dive into Tesla together.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We met each other briefly at the Cybertruck event.
Very briefly.
Shook hands. It was a crazy crowd waiting to get in, very anxious crowd. But it was. We should definitely talk about the Cybertruck, but we'll save that for a little while. So for those that have never listened to your podcast, talk a little bit about that podcast. And I'm very curious to know how you got into that, because this is a daily thing, which I admire and I could never do. It's a huge commitment, but you've got a great following. So give people who don't know who you are a little synopsis of how you got into that.
Yeah, for sure. The quick 2-minute synopsis of it is one day. So I've followed Tesla really closely since I first became aware of the company back in 2013. And weirdly enough, I, until then, didn't really know about Tesla at all. And one day I was just checking, I like investing. So I was checking my investing app, and I saw, Tesla was like the top gaining stock of the day that day, which this was obviously during the 2013 sort of short squeeze type of situation where, I don't think it was necessarily short squeeze, but short covering rally, whatever the case may be, where the stock went from, $35 a share up to 150. So it was kind of in the middle of that run that I noticed Tesla, and, I just thought, oh, that's an interesting, company. And they're actually making electric vehicles that are good, that people actually want to buy, that have high performance and, long range. They're covering charging. And I just kept, learning more and more about the company and becoming more and more fascinated. And took a small position in 2013 in the stock, and just from there kind of kept learning about it every day. Spent a ton of time on the Tesla Motors Club's forum, just reading as much as I could. There's a great group of people there that have just a wealth of knowledge about every single topic you could ever dream of, and people doing a lot of really in-depth great research on Tesla that I just learned a ton from. So I'd spend a couple hours a day reading on those forums, just everything that I could about Tesla, trying to understand exactly what was happening here in the transportation industry with electric vehicles, because it was clear that Tesla was starting something, just from the love that owners had for those vehicles. And that's sort of like the first thing that I look for in any investment is like, I'm very much in the consumer space when I think about investing. And for me, it's just, head up, looking around and seeing what people are responding to. And, you can tell from these forums that people really, really loved this product. And that's pretty rare for that kind of, obsession. And, further on down the line, we've seen that with like the Model 3 unveiling, where there's, lines of hundreds of people outside these stores just waiting to reserve a car that no one's even seen yet. Like, that's insane. When you see that, that's like an obvious sign of like, all right, this is, probably a good idea to invest in. So anyway, spent a ton of time learning about the company. And after, a couple of years of doing that, I realized that I was spending a lot of the time on it still, because I was still super interested in it, but I wasn't quite learning as much anymore. So I thought, all right, maybe now it's time for me to sort of, take what I'm learning and help other people learn about it. Because, back in, this is probably 2016, 2017, there was a lot of misinformation out there about Tesla. This is when the media started to, I think, flip on Tesla a little bit, because early on in Tesla's history, it was sort of this, positive feel-good story about like, oh, look at this, brand new startup like Elon Musk, PayPal. He's trying to do these crazy ideas with SpaceX and Tesla, and it's kind of just like, a feel-good story. And then they started to get some traction and some success. And then I think, people started to feel a little bit threatened by that. And I think that came out in the media, and the story sort of flipped and the sentiment sort of flipped. And there's a lot of negative reporting, a lot of misinformation. Elon Musk got, attacked a little bit at times for some of the things that he did. So, I was spending a lot of time, and at this point, getting a lot of questions from friends whenever there would be, negative stories coming out about Tesla or anything like that. And, I was spending a lot of time responding to them and, adding context to reports from CNBC or, whatever the case may be. So figured, all right, well, a lot of people seem to be interested in this company. There's a lot of poor information out there. I want to do my part to like help get good information out there. And for me, that sort of clarified on, I had a 10-hour car ride and I went and looked for Tesla podcasts because I was bored of listening to like my fantasy football podcasts. So I found Ride the Lightning because Ryan McCaffrey was doing his
Yep, he's
podcast
great.
at that point. So listened to, a few episodes of that on my way. And then I listened to the Tesla show because they were also doing it at that point in time. I think they had just started maybe like 6 months ago or something. And those were both awesome. But Ryan's was more, I felt like, owner focused, whereas really just talking about like the news in terms of the vehicles and things like that. Um, Definitely talking about the business and stuff a little bit, but not quite as much as like what I was interested in. And then the Tesla show was great. They were a little bit more on the business side, but definitely like more on the technology side too.
Software
Um,
for sure.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And they do a great job of covering that, like awesome podcast for sure, if you haven't listened to it. And then for me, it was just like, I wanted something that was more business focused. And I thought, okay, there's not really anything like this out there right now. So I'm spending all this time on Tesla, not really learning that much. Why don't I, do this? It's going to be a few minutes every day where I can just recap, what I'm learning about. Obviously, that was a false premise. It's taken me so many hours to do this podcast, like way, way more than I ever thought it would take. But um, yeah, that was kind of it. And then ironically, another reason for me was to just become a better speaker. So that's why I chose to do the podcast daily, is because I felt like my speaking ability was one of the things that had the potential to hold me back in my career. So I wanted to improve on that. And at the time I was reading a lot about neuroplasticity and the ability of the brain to actually like physically rewire itself through repetitive process. So I just wanted to take advantage of that and thought, all right, Tesla, let's do it daily and see what happens. I'd never thought that it would last. That was back in August of 2017. And now we're, here 2.5 years later, and, it's built a following, and now doing this stuff is my full-time job. So yeah,
That's
it's been
crazy. I
crazy
actually
growth.
didn't
Yeah.
realize it was your full-time job.
Yeah. As of, let's see, when was that? That would have been August. So it was like the 2-year anniversary of the
Wow.
podcast that I announced it to the audience, and episode 400 also coincidentally. So that was kind of like a
Amazing.
nice little milestone. But yeah, so I've been doing it full time for a couple months, and the idea is to kind of grow from what I built with the podcast to, distribute, really fact based, sound information in the best ways that I can, and grow beyond just the podcast. So yeah, now I'm on YouTube and eventually have goals to do other things as
Yeah,
well.
and this is not just, you're not just doing video versions of your audio recording. You're now creating video content where you're in front of the camera talking about topics, which I really, really love. I watched a
Yeah.
few of them, and I think it's excellent content. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a lot of work,
absolutely.
as you know, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned this earlier, and I think it's very true. Like a 15-minute video is hours of preparation, recording, editing.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, I don't know how long it takes for you, but depending on the topic and how long it takes me to research, this could be a 10 to 20 hour endeavor for just a single video.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I was running into when I was doing this, on the side. I was spending, I don't know, I mean, 2 to 3 hours a day, just even doing the research and then recording a 5-minute episode. I'm like overly a perfectionist. So, I want to make sure that I get like every single word right. So I'm doing multiple takes, cutting everything together. And a 5-minute episode, which was, 5 to 7 minutes was probably my average back then, would take me, another hour or two to kind of like put that together. So I'm spending 4 hours a day, 20 hours a week, probably more, in addition to like my full-time job, putting these 5 to 7 minute episodes out. Like, it's just crazy how long some of this stuff takes if you want to do a good job with it.
Are you a Tesla owner yet?
No, I'm not. So I waited in line on March 31st, 2016,
Mhm.
before the unveiling, and put my reservation in. And that reservation still sits in my account today, unfortunately.
So what's holding you back? What are you waiting for before you pull the trigger?
Yeah, for me, I've just always been on the fence. As an investor, like the rest of my life, I'm relatively frugal because I just like putting my money into investments. So that's always where, I see a better use of my money is like Tesla stock versus Tesla the vehicle. I don't want to drop 40 grand on the car when I could, put that in Tesla stock, and then, in a couple of years it's 120 grand. So I've just like never been to the point where I've been comfortable doing that. And now that I'm doing this full time, I I just don't drive that often anymore. So
Yeah.
it's like, what's the point now?
Yeah.
Someday I will, so I will someday. It's just a matter of
And
when.
you probably don't need a car right now. I'm getting the impression that you're
Yeah,
not like chomping at the bit to get a new version of what you already have.
right. Exactly. Like I just, I probably drive, unless I'm taking a trip, I probably drive like 5 to 10 miles a week. Like it's just nothing. So
I'm
like
like totally
why
the
even have a
opposite.
car? Yeah.
I'm like 60,000 miles a year. So I'm like, okay, this
Yeah.
starts
Cause
to
you're in
add up pretty
realty. So you're
quickly.
constantly like out and
I'm in
about
my
driving
car.
from property to property. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm in my car. After this, I go, I drive into the city, which would be about a 50 minute drive. I have two meetings with two different clients, and then I need to do a preview for an out of state client. So it'll be a busy afternoon, but I totally get the thought process. And I'm going to segue here. What I'm really looking forward to is just this very pragmatic approach to looking at the business as a whole. I've got so many questions for you, and I think the first one that I probably want to start off with is, what's your assessment of 2019? What do you expect overall, sort of big picture, for almost a week from today when they do their earnings call?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, 2019, I think it was a very volatile year. I think we all feel really great about how it ended up. Tesla met and exceeded the low end of their guidance for the year, which pretty much nobody thought was possible after they delivered, what was it, like 65, I don't even remember the number, but deliveries were super low in Q1. And from there, Tesla, yeah, it was about 65,000, I think. So Tesla would have had to deliver, from that point, 100,000 vehicles per quarter on average to even just get the low end of their guidance. And coming off 60,000, like nobody really thought that was possible. And, when that happens, that puts Tesla's credibility at risk, which over time has already been a big, point of contention for people following Tesla, because Elon Musk just sets those aggressive timelines. And unfortunately, that comes with the downside of sometimes you miss those things, which hurts your credibility. So all that stuff was kind of piling up on Tesla at Q1. Obviously, the stock sort of fell to, multi-year lows to, I think, $177 per share back in June, I think it was, sort of the aftermath of Q1. And yeah, then, Tesla delivered and things turned around and the demand was there, which people were nervous about. But yeah, it's come to fruition. And I think now we're sitting here at a point in time where throughout Q4, Tesla was able to deliver, 112,000 vehicles, and they were able to do that without actually lowering prices at all. And now we are, almost halfway through Q1, a third of the way through Q1, and even though we had the federal U.S. tax credit expire at the end of Q4, in the past when that's happened, when those step downs have happened for Tesla, they've lowered prices in reaction to that. But here we sit in Q1 and Tesla hasn't changed pricing at all. So that's clearly a strong sign of demand. Model 3 wait times, I think, in the US right now are pretty much like 6 to 10 weeks, depending on the configuration. So and then in Europe and I believe in China, pretty much everything is out to March. So in terms of demand, without adjusting pricing, Tesla's is looking really good, which is contrasting to last Q1. Really impressive, I think, and again, restoring the credibility and is a big part of why the stock is up lately.
It's very encouraging. I also did a sort of recap of 2019 in a very different way. I sort of touched on the different videos that I did throughout the year,
Mm-hmm.
and highlighting some of the things that Tesla went through. It seems like forever ago, but just about a year ago, they did away with the lower range, smaller battery pack for S and X.
S and X,
That
yep.
was, they went with the 75 kilowatt hour. That was a really big move. They did away with the referral program. Um, they said that they were going to shut down the physical stores and do only online purchases. They fired some employees. Q1 was very tumultuous for Tesla.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people really hopped on that. A lot of shorts and critics of Tesla hopped on that. And so they did just a lot of what appeared to be, from the outside looking in, just sort of knee-jerk reactions to the business. And I understand why a lot of people were concerned. It concerned me a little bit at different points with some of these sort of larger decisions. And even internally, I heard from some employees like, yeah, this is kind of crazy. We don't know what's going to happen here in the near future with our jobs. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that they sorted things out. It seems like they're now moving into a position where they can start to hire more and hopefully backfill some of those spaces that they eliminated a year ago.
Yeah, and that's like a huge point too that I think Zach, the CFO, made on, it was either the last earnings call or two earnings calls ago, but I think it was the Q3 one. He said, we're finally at a point in the business where basically what we're bringing in terms of the profit from S, X, and 3 is enough to actually cover the fixed costs of our business, and that's a point that Tesla has been struggling to get to for its entire existence. And that's a huge milestone to be able to get to that point where you're comfortable covering the fixed cost of your business, because that means your runway now, you sort of made it, like you're in the air now, at least a little bit. You're not constantly just trying to get to the end of that ramp up where you can finally get to profitability. So that's a huge turning point in the business where you can start then putting the cash. Tesla's always put the cash back into the business, but they can start doing that and actually not having to take on capital from outside sources. And that's the fear with companies like this, is that you sort of run out of that runway. And that's what happened in Q1, is people got scared that that was going to be the end. Like, okay, Tesla absorbed all the demand that they had from a multi-year backlog of people waiting outside of stores for this car that they've been waiting for a decade. And that's it. People, those early adopters, bought it all, and now Tesla's done. So that's the fear that happens when you have demand uncertainty, that Tesla's never going to make it. And now we're to the point now that, okay, we've proven that thesis false. Like, clearly there is new demand. Clearly people do want this vehicle, and clearly Tesla's able to turn a profit on it at the price point that they're selling it at these volumes. So that it doesn't completely remove the fear of bankruptcy, but it goes from a concern to something that you don't really have to worry too much about anymore at this point. And that's sort of what Zach was emphasizing on the Q3 earnings call. And that's, again, a big reason that the stock and the sentiment has flipped so much this last 90 days or so.
And it does address one of those sort of a handful of concerns by analyst, financial institutions, and shorts about Tesla never being able to make any money. They've never consistently made a profit.
Mm-hmm.
And it appears like, we'll see here next week, but it appears like they've really turned that corner, and from this point forward can make a profit. And I would even say, and I would love to get your take on this, it appears like they've positioned some pieces of the business, i.e. China production, to be able to weather through Q1 of this year. What's your sentiment of that? Do you think that Q1 this year is going to look a lot better than previous?
Yeah, I mean, compared to last year, it's going to be really great because last year was so tough. I think the comparison that's going to be more difficult is sort of sequential, because Q4 is such a strong quarter. I mean, in the US, we had the federal EV tax credit expiring, so that has that demand pull forward effect, which boosts the quarter. The Netherlands also had some tax changes happening from Q4 to Q1 that pulled some demand forward there too. So there were some tailwinds in Q4. And I think that's where it's really interesting of Tesla, not having to make any huge adjustments into Q1, despite some of those things going away. In terms of how profitable they can be, it really does depend on Gigafactory Shanghai and how quickly Tesla's able to ramp that up. In the early stages of a production ramp up, you have to, this is pretty in detail, but part of the costs of goods sold on the vehicle is the depreciation and amortization of the equipment. And some of that happens on a per unit basis, but some of that happens on a per time basis. So for the per time basis stuff, when you have a lower amount of vehicles produced in that period of time, then your depreciation and amortization per vehicle in that period of time is higher, which means your gross margins are poor. And that's where it really puts a strain on profitability. And that's why during the beginning of production ramp ups, your profitability is poor. And then once you get to a certain volume, that depreciation and amortization spreads out amongst enough units where you can then be profitable. So, and then there's labor costs and things just get more efficient. All that stuff happens as you ramp up too. So the faster that Tesla can do that, the more likely they're able to show profit. And I think that's what's exciting about Gigafactory Shanghai is that's going to happen so much faster there than it happened for Fremont. So we're not going to have to go through that period of time where it was so painful, through parts of 2018 and early 2019, where Tesla was struggling to get there. And that's kind of what we just talked about. What Zach was saying is like they're there now, where they're covering those fixed costs, and hopefully Gigafactory Shanghai gets there pretty quickly too. I don't know if it'll happen for sure in Q1, but certainly, Q2, Q3, that looks really strong.
Well, the one thing to keep in mind is that this is not a brand new car. This is not a start of a brand new car
Yeah.
production wise. So they've been producing this car for a couple of years now. It's just in a new location, and something I'm really curious to see if what we saw with the speed of manufacture or of building of Gigafactory Shanghai, if that China effect will roll into the actual production process of the car. Just efficiency, mass volume, mass production, sheer population and people of China. It just seems like they just do stuff really fast, and someone tells them to do it, and it gets done.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think that's what's been so impressive about, Shanghai just going from nothing to producing, I think they produced 1,000 vehicles this year, like in less than a year, going from a muddy pit. And I think Lynette Lopez of Business Insider, sort of infamously said like, oh, they don't even have like, there's nothing there. It's a muddy pit and they're never going to be able to produce vehicles there this year. And, Tesla proved her and many others wrong, by being able to do that. And it's just a testament to what China's been able to accomplish when they, really put their effort behind supporting something, which clearly they have with electric vehicles and with Tesla.
Transitioning slightly to how Tesla did in 2019, are you optimistic about profitability in 2019? Does it look likely based on what you know and what you've been following?
For Q4, definitely super optimistic. I think, expectations have gone up. I don't have the most recent Wall Street consensus. I'm hoping to do an episode on that early next week if I get those numbers. So keep an eye out for that. But certainly the expectation, even before we got the delivery numbers, was for a profitable Q4. But for profitability for the year, Tesla would need to post something crazy, like it's a $967 million profit or net income for the quarter, which, I think Q3 is a couple hundred million. So there's not any expectation that Tesla would be fully profitable for the year. There are like a couple of random things sitting out there that, could maybe lead to that, but that's like a 1% type of chance opportunity. So yeah, I think most people expect profits in sort of that, 150 million to 300 million type of range, which is a pretty big range, but not enough to be profitable for the year. The exciting thing is that as we head into Q1, then when we look at the end of Q1, the trailing 12 months of profitability, Tesla only needs Q4 and Q1 combined to be about, 250, $275 million of net income to be profitable for those trailing 12 months. And that's an exciting milestone because, as we talked about, there's never been a period where Tesla's put a full year together of profitability. They've always been negative. And once Tesla does put that together, they actually become eligible for the S&P 500. So the requirements there are to have the trailing 12 months be profitable. And then it's also suggested that the most recent quarter be profitable. So if Tesla can pull off that profit in Q1, then they could be, included in the S&P 500 in sometime in Q2, maybe.
How does that benefit? Does that benefit Tesla at all? Does it mean more recognition? Does it mean that Tesla is maturing as a company and they're looked at differently from the financial industry?
Yeah, I think so. I think it adds credibility, and this is something that's kind of interesting to think about with the stock price too, just in general. Like as people have a more positive perception of Tesla's business, there's less fear out there for people that maybe are on the fence about buying a Tesla because like, oh, I heard Tesla's going to go bankrupt. Like I'm not going to
It's a
buy
great point.
a car in a company that's going to go bankrupt. But as the sentiment shifts, I think people get more comfortable with that, and maybe they start to consider Tesla. So I think the share price obviously, boosts morale within the company. That's a good thing. But I think for potential customers, it also helps there. Um, so the S&P 500 inclusion, what that does is there are a lot of index funds that track the S&P 500, and index investing, is more popular than ever nowadays. So there's a huge amount of assets that track the S&P 500. And when the S&P 500 adds a company, those other, tracking instruments have to then add that company to their index as well. So that means a lot of companies are going to be looking to buy Tesla, which can, lead to a pretty significant appreciation in the share price. There's other factors there too, but all other factors being constant, that would increase the price, which again has some of those other knock-on effects of more credibility and things like that you mentioned.
I want to talk about some products and get your take on 3 products, and then I also want to make sure and get your take on Tesla shorts as well.
Yeah.
First product though that I think is top of mind for everyone in 2020 is the Model Y. It appears like there's a lot of chatter going on that this thing is going to start production here sooner rather than later. Certainly sooner than summertime, which is the last update that we received from Tesla. So what do you make of that, and how does that change production numbers as well as revenue for 2020?
Yeah. So when Tesla first announced the Model Y, I think were you at the Model Y event by chance?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. So definitely a very different event than like the Cybertruck event. It was
Agreed.
not that I would go as far as saying it was understated, but if you're going to compare it to like a Cybertruck event, it definitely was understated.
Yes.
You could tell that Tesla wasn't, actively trying to hype this vehicle and sell this vehicle, and for good reason. You have a product out there in the Model 3 that fits the needs of some of the people that maybe would opt for a Model Y otherwise. So there's not really any reason for Tesla to try to hype that up too much. And I think they did the same thing when they gave their projected timeline for the Model Y, which was I think late 2020 for like starting production essentially, and that seemed pretty conservative at the time. And since we've we now have the update of from the Q3 call, as you said, volume production, which to Elon is more than 1,000 per week by mid 2020. So for Tesla to get there, they need to start producing those vehicles pretty much now-ish, sometime in the next couple of months to be able to go through that production ramp to actually be at 1,000 per week, say by July or August. So I just did a video on this a couple of days ago. There's all sorts of clues out here on the Model Y now. The NHTSA VIN decoder has just been published, a couple weeks ago. So you can go and put Model Y VINs in there now and, get the VIN information, which we don't have any sort of timeline from, how that compares to like when the Model X VIN decoder came online or Model 3. So it's tough to say exactly how much that means. But the other clue was the CARB certification papers were filed and signed by the California Air and Resource Board for the zero emission vehicle credits. And we do have timelines there for Model S, X, and 3. And generally those range from about a month to 2 months in terms of like when those papers were signed between 2 first deliveries. And the Model Y papers just came out and they were signed on December 19th. So if we put a couple months from there, we might be looking at, if we go off the timelines of the other vehicles, somewhere in sort of like mid-February, mid-March or something like that, for first deliveries. And then that fits with how long it would probably take Tesla to ramp up to 1,000 per week. So there's a lot of clues out there. And then of course, like all the sightings that we're seeing nowadays of the Model Y just out in public, it seems like we get a new one of those every single day. So, clearly there's a lot of action here, and I think we're going to see those first deliveries probably, if not in Q1, early in Q2. And, if they can get to 1,000 per week sometime in early Q2, they could maybe produce, 50,000 plus vehicles this year, which I don't think people would have been expecting based on the guidance. And again, it goes back to that credibility thing of like, people used to have to discount Tesla's guidance of like, if Tesla said, fall 2020, then okay, that probably means spring 2021 or maybe even later. So now you're actually having like that shift back to reality, and then even ahead of that, which is, rare for Tesla.
I think the tide is changing with expectations. I get the impression that there's a concerted effort on Elon's part in particular to sort of understate things instead of what he has a reputation of overstating things. So I'm extremely excited. I think that this is probably, aside from the battery and powertrain investor day, this is probably the most understated product for Tesla in 2020 for a couple of reasons. Number one, it shares 75% of the same parts as it does with Model 3. Two, it's a segment that is incredibly popular in North America, but my understanding is that this segment, the CUV segment, is also popular in Europe and China as well. And so I know that the Model Y will be the most popular Tesla in Colorado because of the ground clearance and the ability to get through snow with the all-wheel drive package. So I think, aside from the Battery and Powertrain Investor Day, this will be one of the most understated but successful launches for Tesla this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think Tesla set themselves up well for the launch to go much more smoothly than the Model 3, for example. Like you said, there's the shared parts. They now have experience with volume production, even though it is a little bit different of a vehicle. Tesla's gone through that before with the Model 3, so it's not completely new to them this time. And they've set expectations accordingly. So, and I think it is exciting now that we're starting to see all these sightings. People seem to actually starting to get excited about the Model Y, which, at the unveil, it was kind of anticlimactic of like, okay, this is just a bigger Model 3. But just from, following things online, it seems like people are starting to come around on it a little bit and get really excited for the vehicle too, which is awesome.
Well, it's not as flashy as the Cybertruck, which we're going to talk about in just a minute.
Few
But
things are.
no, I mean, it just everything pales in comparison to the Cybertruck. But
Yeah.
it's not flashy. It looks very similar to the Model 3, but I think it's addressing a huge need. And I think that a lot of people who don't follow Tesla, this will be their first electric vehicle because it just addresses it checks off a lot of the boxes that people want and need, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So about the Cybertruck, you were there. We were both
Yes.
there. I'm curious to get your take as that thing rolls up on stage. The fog and the music is going. The lights are shining through the fog, and that thing rolls up on stage. What was your first thought?
I think regardless of anyone's first thought, the first action was sort of jaw drop. Like, no matter what you expected, it was jaw dropping. Just especially with like they had I think it was Grimes with like the hologram there. They had all the music, and it just like happened like that. Like normally there's some like lead into these things. Like Model Y, it was like half an hour of talking about like Tesla's history, and then like they brought the Model Y out. This, it was like, hey, I'm Elon. This is Grimes, and like here's the Cybertruck. And there's like these flamethrowers and stuff going. Sorry to say my mic, but so just like they did a really good job of kind of like catching everybody off guard, just even from that presentation perspective. But yeah, when it first rolled out, like I think I had an aggressive reaction, but it was more muted from, I think, a lot of the people that I was around. I don't know why, but not to say that it's exactly what I expected it to be, because I don't think anyone expected it to look exactly like that. But it wasn't quite as shocking to me at first as it seems to have been for other people. And I think even throughout the night, it was a little bit shocking at first, but even throughout the night, like I think all of us seeing it so many times. I don't know if were you in the test drive line or the test ride line?
No, I didn't get a chance to. I had to fly back home.
So when we were in the test ride line, I just kept driving by, like taking these test rides, and every single time it drove by, like it grew on you a little bit more and a little bit more, and you just become more comfortable with the side of the vehicle. And by the end of the night, you're just like, wow, this thing's actually like incredible and actually looks good. Because even though I wasn't super shocked with it at first, I didn't think that it looked that good. But then, yeah, standing there, seeing it drive by like constantly, it's just like, wow, this is I actually do like how this looks, which is so weird. What was your first reaction?
I was speechless. And I remember that being the sort of collective response when they drove it up on stage. Generally, Tesla events, the people in the audience are very responsive. You have people like cheering and yelling and "I love you" and Elon for president and stuff like that. There wasn't that when this thing drove up on stage, and I even though Elon was prepping everyone that this was going to be a very different looking truck, that it was going to be very very science fiction like and very Blade Runner-esque. Armored personnel carrier. I still was just speechless when it drove up on stage. It's still like when I think back to that moment, I just thought, whoa, what is this? This was not like anything that I expected in my mind, in my imagination. And there was a big part of me that thought he's just punking us, and he's going to bring out the real truck any moment now, right? Like this is going to be the crazy looking one, but if you want a more normal looking one, here's the normal looking one. But that
Yeah.
never happened.
No.
And you know, I guess after having some months to think about it, it's so different that it makes you sort of be curious about it. And not for me personally, but I know a lot of people have said this, even people who are not Tesla owners and who drive trucks. They're like, yeah, this thing is, I've warmed up to this thing. I will probably get one. I talked with one of my mortgage lenders that I do a lot of business with, and he's an F-150 driver. And he initially was like, that thing is ugly. And I asked him last week what he thought about it. And if it had grown on him, he's like, yeah, I'm probably going to get one. And I think that's the consensus for a lot of people.
Yeah. That's why I was really grateful to see it in person, because I sort of experienced that, I think, in accelerated time, just like having it drive by so often, where, at first it was a little off-putting, and then, you just keep seeing it, and it grows on you and it grows on you. And after a while, you start to actually like it in a positive way. It's not even you become neutral, you actually become positive on it. So that was what I was most fortunate to be able to see, is experience that, because I felt like that would, permeate through the masses as people got a little bit more time to, see it, and things like that. And I think it also just, it's so uniquely designed that it does intrigue you, and it makes you ask, like, okay, like, what the heck, what is this and why? And it just makes you do more research. And that's a great thing for Tesla.
So I'm trying to decide if I want to go here. I think what I want to ask you is, I was gonna use an analogy about what it's like, but I want to get to some other topics here too. Um, is it possible that Elon and Tesla follow this under promise and over deliver for the Cybertruck? So they've talked about a 2021, if I remember correctly, a 2021 timeline for production, but Model Y, they did something similar with the Model Y. They introduced it last March, and now we're looking at possibly 12 months later, them starting production with that. So Cybertruck, this is a very different production process, but
Very
is
different.
it possible that they're under promising, they're going to under promise and over deliver with this, and start production in 2020?
That's a really good question, and I probably should have spent more time thinking about that before you'd asked this question, because I haven't really spent much time thinking about that, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, a similar timeline will put Cybertruck maybe in like November of this year, March to March, November to November. Um, they are different. So Model Y being more similar to Model 3, like I think that, is a big part of the accelerated timeline there. And I think Tesla was very intentionally underselling the Model Y, which they don't really, I think they're kind of doing the opposite with the Cybertruck. Like there's a lot of hype there, and they definitely want to sell it. So I think having an earlier target for the Cybertruck in that case is more beneficial to build that hype of like, okay, you're not going to have to wait till 2023 to actually get this vehicle. Um, so I think there's more incentive for Tesla to actually give, a more accurate date with the Cybertruck guidance than there was for the Model Y. So I think there are a lot of different circumstances there, but it also wouldn't surprise me if Tesla has sort of adopted that mentality of like, okay, let's try to, in our public guidance, be a little bit more conservative, and then let's try to beat that. Because I think, certainly they have to have understood this year how beneficial that has been for them throughout the course of this year, is beating those expectations. So if they can keep that rolling, Wall Street loves that. So that would be
Absolutely.
incredible. I think the question is like, where are they getting the batteries, and where would they build it? So I think
Yeah.
we, maybe we'll get some more insight into that during Battery and Powertrain Day, which I know everyone's insanely excited
Yes.
for.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like now that 2020 is here, this is the next thing that people are looking forward to. And I'm under the opinion that it will be a very key and fundamental um, event for Tesla, even though it's not necessarily a new product, a new vehicle. It's a
It's
core
almost better
component.
than that, because because it affects. It's not just like, oh, this is a new category. This is the
Yeah,
underlying technology of every single product line, not even just Tesla's vehicles. Like it's Tesla Energy. It spans everything. So it's even, to me, even more exciting than a new product.
I totally agree, and I'm tempted to dive into it, but I know that many people, including myself, have talked about this Maxwell tech and how it's implemented at nauseum. So We can save that for another time. The third product that I'm really interested to get your take on, and I think you'll probably understand this and probably be able to articulate it in a way that will impact Tesla financials, and something that very few people have talked about as a fundamental linchpin to Tesla's profitability is this recurring revenue for software products. This is something that no other automaker has the ability to do the way that Tesla does, and Tesla has exhibited this proficiency in creating software products that people look forward to, that chat about, and that also produce revenue. It could be as silly as the the fart app, but I think where they're headed here with this car is an app store. I'm curious to get your take on software as a service with a recurring revenue model, and then how that could impact Tesla's bottom line.
Yeah, for sure. This is something that I think people justifiably get really excited about, and it's something that I'm excited about too. When we think about it in the near term, Tesla's fleet will approach 1 million vehicles, sometime Q1, Q2. And when we think about that as sort of an install base for software, it's starting to become significant, but I don't think it's to the point yet where it really is that significant in terms of the bottom line potential. Um, you have 1 million vehicles out there, and let's say you're able to get $10 per month from those vehicles, then um, for the software you're getting $10 million per month, and then it can start to add up pretty significantly. So that's $120 million a year in terms of pretty high gross margin revenue, and that's just from like a $10 thing. And we've seen Tesla start to do some of these things over the last 90 days or so with the acceleration boost on, I can't remember which trim of the Model 3, but one of the trims of the Model 3, improving it by half a second for $2,000. And I did some math on this a while ago, but I think that probably maybe added like $20 million of, pretty much straight profit for Tesla, which it's not nothing, but it's not a huge number either. But over time, as the fleet grows, like these numbers just become bigger and bigger and bigger. So, if you add $10 a month to 1 million vehicles, $120 million of profit, let's say, and you apply, a 25 times valuation on that, then you're looking at, I really got myself in a hole on math here, but maybe like a $3 billion valuation just from, sort of flipping that switch of software. And that's where it starts to get tricky, because you have to bump that up against Tesla's actual valuation, which now is 100 billion. So I think some of those things, start to get priced in. Certainly I still, even at this point, think Tesla's undervalued for the long term. Yeah, but I'm kind of talking in circles on this, but the summary of it would be like, it's super exciting long term when you have an install base of 10 million plus vehicles. Then it becomes very significant, but also at that point, Tesla is going to be an even bigger valuation company. So it's potentially always this small piece of the company, because Tesla's already making so much margin on each vehicle, where it's not like a phone where that percent is going to be as big. That's going to be the software. Is that going to make sense?
It does. Do you remember when Apple released the first iPhone? They didn't.
Yes.
There was not an app store, and people wanted it. And I believe, if my memory serves me correct, and people watching are welcome to put in the comments, or you can if you recall. But I think they initially started out with apps that they developed, that they self-developed, and then a little ways down the way, then they introduced it to third-party developers. That, I think, is where Tesla could make a lot of money, because then they're not just reliant on whatever they add, but then they're opening it up to software developers to do whatever. It could be as silly as a fart app, but it could be as useful as implementing Waze data into integrating that into the maps, and being able to tell when there's speed traps, or when there's a wreck, or a slowdown in traffic. And then Tesla's taking a cut of all of that, 25% or whatever. I don't remember what Apple takes a cut of, but that to
like
me
that
is really promising.
Yeah. And I don't want to undersell it, because over the long term, that is extremely exciting, and Tesla is extremely well positioned to take advantage of that, more so than any other automaker, obviously. So it is very exciting in the longer term, especially, if those third-party app type of things open up. And we already see that there's demand for those things. There's a number of third-party Tesla apps now that don't, just use the APIs and don't have that actual integration to like a Tesla app store or anything, but they already have thousands of users on those third-party apps. So if Tesla eventually opens up the doors for that, yeah, the potential is very significant in the longer term.
And the fact that there's not a at the moment there's not a competitive in-car software on the market for automobile. That's
Yeah.
the other thing that really just makes me curious. At what point does I've gotten a little bit of taste of Rivian's in-car software. I think it's even though it's pre-production, I was really impressed with it. I think that that's the best that I've seen so far for an electric vehicle. Audi's is pretty good on the e-tron. It's hard to make a judgment about Mach-E's, although I have played with it and it's quite laggy.
Yeah. Very.
Um, but the Bolts is not great.
The Taycan seemed pretty decent. We spent a little bit of time in that
Mhm,
at the LA Auto Show. They didn't have like a
mhm,
full version, but they had,
mhm,
like a cutout of a couple seats in the dashboard that we could play with.
mhm.
That
Yep.
one seemed snappy, but it's a $150,000 car, so probably
Sure.
should be.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So it's very promising. We'll see what happens here. So I want to maybe take like 10 minutes and get your take on a couple of things. One of the things that I often hear from shorts is that Tesla's vehicles are not profitable. So and I think that there was a long string by journalists from the LA Times, Russ Mitchell, trying to sort of project this, and I've seen a few other people project this as well, that they're not a profitable on a per car basis, but Tesla says otherwise. So where's that discrepancy at? Can you sort of unpack that a little bit, because
Yeah.
that's always been a question of mine.
Yeah, absolutely. So that goes back to the fixed cost stuff that we were talking about earlier. So basically, what people are doing when they're saying that Tesla loses money on every car they sell, they're applying Tesla's entire fixed cost base and spreading that across the cars that Tesla delivers. So they sell, let's say Tesla. Well, that's a bad example. So if we go back a few years and we consider the fact that Tesla's never shown a profit, let's say they lose $100 million on 100,000 cars sold. Well, then you're losing, whatever, $10,000 per car sold by that math. So that's what they're doing. They're just saying like, okay, here's the car sold, here's the net income, and here's how negative it was. So that's, Tesla's losing money for every car they sell. The problem is that doesn't account for the difference between variable costs and fixed costs, which Tesla has to maintain a certain level of infrastructure. They've got these facilities that they've paid for. They've got store and service infrastructure. They've got supercharger infrastructure. All of that can be leveraged across more vehicles, and as Tesla ramps up production, that's what happens. So even in the case where Tesla's losing $100 million a year, it's because of those fixed costs. It's not because they're not making actual margin dollars on each additional vehicle they're selling. So that's called the gross profit versus the net income. So Tesla's always had strong gross profitability. It just hasn't been from an earnings net income level. And yeah, it's just an entirely flawed thesis. Like I just can't even believe that has ever gained any traction. But thankfully, we're now to the point where Tesla's going to start being profitable over quarters and years, where that argument can just fade away.
It makes a lot of sense, and I think it's two different ways of looking at it, and it's how you spin it, I suppose. It's whatever lens that you look through. So they're not necessarily wrong. It's just how they're coming to that conclusion and what they're.
Well, I think it is fundamentally wrong, because even in the case where Tesla's losing money, if they sell one more vehicle, they lose less money. So it's wrong to say that they're losing money on each vehicle sold, because they're not. They're losing less money for each additional vehicle they sell, because that gross profit is positive. That's what they're actually, bringing in. The problem is, like, say they bring in $20,000 of gross profit, but with the fixed costs, they have to maintain the infrastructure, and that costs them $30,000 per vehicle. Well, let's say you double your profitability, or you increase production such that your fixed cost per vehicle is only $15,000 and your gross profit still stays at $20,000 per vehicle. well, your variable cost didn't actually change, but now you're just at the scale where, okay, instead of losing $10,000 per vehicle, you're now actually gaining 5,000 at the end of the day, even with the same, gross profitability. It's a little bit tricky to explain without the numbers in front of us, but that's the gist. Is it's all about getting to scale, and it's all about covering those fixed costs. And that goes back to what we were talking about at the start, where Zach was saying we finally got to the point where we're covering those things, and from there it's just growth, which is super exciting.
I think it is incredibly exciting. Um, Last question, I think we'll wrap up with is, what do you make of current short position, the volume of it? Do you expect for that, as Tesla continues to be more of a profitable company, for that to just sort of fade away in the distance?
Yeah, I mean that's a tricky question for the last one, because it really comes down to like, where is the short interest coming from? And there's a lot of people out there theorizing that a lot of the short position is maintained by people in the oil industry or auto industry or whatever the case may be, whatever industry that Tesla's disrupting, that are trying to maintain that short position to put pressure on Tesla's business. Um, and I think the argument was is pretty strong for that point of view in the past, but now that Tesla doesn't need to rely as much on the capital markets going forward, because they will get to that profitable level. Um, I think there's less incentive to try to keep the stock price down. If Tesla doesn't need to raise capital, then the stock price isn't really relevant for the fundamentals of Tesla's business, other than some of the things that we talked about earlier. But short answer, I would say yes. I do expect the short interest to continue to come down over time. I mean, we've seen it cut in half this year, and certainly that helps the stock price appreciate. But we haven't really seen like a true short squeeze like a lot of people like to talk about. It's sort of been this slow and steady unwinding, where every couple of weeks short interest declines by 5-10% or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. I lied. Last question. Aside from aside from the battery powertrain investor day and maybe Model Y, is there anything else you're looking forward to in 2020 for Tesla?
Yes, a number of different things. Um, since we were talking about like depreciation and amortization and stuff, and leveraging fixed costs, like this is a very exciting year for Tesla in those regards. The capex spending, which is really what eventually comes out in depreciation and amortization, is like 65% lower for Gigafactory Shanghai than it is for Fremont, which means that depreciation and amortization expenses per vehicle are also going to be 65% lower, which means really strong margins. Couple that with the fact that labor is cheaper in China, and local sourcing of parts, like the margins from Gigafactory Shanghai are, the outlook there is incredibly strong, and I think underappreciated. Not to mention the fact that Tesla continues to make margin improvements out of Fremont too, which I think is something that's going to be really exciting to see for Q4 and into 2020, that I think people are underestimating, especially as Model Y gets ramped up and starts to leverage all of those economies of scale too. So I'm really, really excited about the profitability outlook as Tesla continues to get to scale here and becomes more and more capital efficient. And I think people are really underestimating that. And then in terms of like more of a product slash feature, I think the one that everybody has to be excited about is what does it mean for autonomy this year? Like what does this city navigate on autopilot sort of full self-driving feature complete feature set look like? When does that happen? And how close does that get us to a Tesla network type of situation? That's the big thing, in addition to like battery powertrain day, that I'm looking forward to this year.
Amazing. Rob, thank you so much for jumping on
Yeah, thanks
and
for having
chatting.
me.
It was exactly what I expected. Just very easy conversation.
Awesome.
You're very knowledgeable, and I'm very glad we got a chance to talk. Where can people find your podcast and YouTube channel?
Yeah, so I just got on YouTube, so you can find that. Just search Tesla Daily Podcast or Rob Maurer, Maurer. That should come up. Otherwise, the podcast, yeah, it's on any podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, also YouTube. Wherever you want to find it, just search Tesla Daily. Pretty simple. And then I
Cool,
am on
man.
Twitter at Tesla Podcast too. So follow me
Yes,
there.
absolutely. Awesome, man. Well, thanks again. Really appreciate it, and we'll talk soon, Rob.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it.
Yep, you betcha.